Wow. Well, welcome back for you networkers. It's good to see your numbers. I don't see faces yet, but I'm really excited that you're with us. And I'm even more excited to have the opportunity to spend some time with Robert F. Smith, who is always fun to be with, and you learn a lot. And I'm looking forward to the journey. For those of you who are watching, I want to let you know that if you have a question, to feel free to place it into the chat feature, and I'll try to incorporate them and share some of those with Robert as we go along. So feel free to, someone's monitoring it and will give me the heads up if there's an opportunity to incorporate a question, okay? But let's just get right at it. It's one of those moments where, everybody starts somewhere. Robert, welcome.
Thanks, Mike. Good to be here. Good to see you again, man.
Good to see you too. Let's talk about your origin story. We don't need to get into an argument about whether success is a product of your nature or nurtured. It's probably a little bit of both, candidly. But what would be helpful, just to kick things off, is to understand how your early years directed the course of your later years. Was it what your parents said? Was it what they did? But just give us a little bit of appreciation for that.
Yeah, and I appreciate you asking that question. I like to talk about the community from which I come from. I'm actually in Colorado today, and I grew up. My family's fourth generation from Colorado. I'm fourth generation from Colorado. And grew up in an all-black neighborhood. This is in time of segregation, and so there was one Japanese family that lived in our neighborhood, but outside that was all African Americans, and there were families, communities, single parents in some cases. And I always like to kind of borrow this term that we continue to refine and develop, a term called beloved community. And I lived in a beloved community. It was a community that really focused on taking care of the community. And my parents were, leaders in that community, were school teachers. My dad also led a civic association. It was called North City Park Civic Association. One of the things that he focused on was, how our community would be treated in terms of, various things like, social services. And at the time, we used to get a lot of snow in Denver. And our neighborhood was typically one of the last to get snowplowed. I mean, there'd be 2-3 feet of snow, and you have all these working parents who have to get to work, some via bus, some with carpool, whatever it might be. And then the streets would be completely clogged with snow. And of course they couldn't get to work, which creates a problem for them ultimately in keeping their jobs, et cetera. And my father saw this as a big issue and literally pulled together a civic association. That was just one of the issues they focused on. There was also voting rights and everything from, Head Start programs, et cetera, that he and a group of African-American parents focused on to ensure that our community had a voice that was heard. And I just remember, again, growing up in that environment, first of all, you saw a blanket of care, and I'm going to say that across the children. A blanket of care was expressed in multiple ways from the time in which you were, sent to the store to go buy something, how people looked out for you on the way there and the way back, and of course reported on you if you did something like, throw rocks or, tease the dog or whatever, and you'd hear about it when you got home, to, when we, went to the state of desegregation and forced busing, when you got home, we got home a little earlier than some of the other parents, and certain parents were taking the kids and ensure that in my case, the older kids who were in those rooms would, in those houses would educate us and, and tutor us. And the parent would make sure that we had some nutritious snack or whatever it was until our parents got home from work. So, I grew up very much in that form of a community. And my mother, I tell that famous story, she grew up in Washington, D.C., which is where you are, I know.
Yeah.
Multiple generations there, moved out to Colorado to get her master's, ultimately her doctorate degree in teaching and education. And she wrote a check, $25 a month to United Negro College Fund ever since all I can remember. So 50 plus years or whatever it was. And I just remember And you'll I'm sure get this when they had these new Converse All Stars with $12.50 a pair, and man, I just wanted a pair of those, and I was like, Mom, why are you writing that check? Because I could buy 2 pair with that. And she said, yeah, that's why you're going to go out and cut lawns and sell golf balls and shovel snow, so you can buy your own pair. She said, this is so that we can continue to educate our community. And those are things that stick with you. It's it's part of the fabric of how you grow up. Ultimately starts to hopefully express itself in who you are and what you feel your responsibilities are as a human being and as an African American in particular in the communities in which you're in today. So that's kind of the beloved, just some texture of the beloved community I had a chance to grow up in.
Well, I like the term beloved community, and and thank you for this indulging me, because it's so easy for people to get lost with what you're doing now and what your brand is without really taking into consideration the origin of it, because we're young once, and
right.
Get a sense of the essence of that.
And some of us will stay young forever, right, Mike?
Oh, of course we will. Of course we will. And speaking of, though, relative to your entrepreneurial success, there are a number of essential skills involved in being a successful entrepreneur. And using an entrepreneurial skill or a mindset in one's corporate work is also can be sort of identified as entrepreneurial. What would really be important, and I've been wanting to ask you this for a while, considering what all that you've done, but people would assume, and I'm just throwing it out there, people will assume Vista was like this overnight sensation. It just happened. And you and I both know that there were a lot of nights and a lot of days relative to creating it. But, one of the questions I wanted to ask you is when did you decide to establish Vista, and how did you prepare for launching it? 'Cause I think that would be something that everyone would find interesting to hear.
Yeah. Happy. I mean, when you think about like the term of the origin story, there's points in time, but there's, often, pathways that lead to that point in time. And if I really wind it back, there's a whole bunch of, elements in that led to, kind of me saying, hey, this makes sense to do. This makes sense to take a risk, to start a business, to leave a place like Goldman Sachs, to go start a business in an area that no one else is doing at a time when everybody thought it was crazy. So let's wind it back, because it is important to really think about the preparation. And it wasn't like, oh man, all roads lead to this. It was all roads were frankly, designed around things that I was interested in. I had the opportunity to get an internship. I've told that story, so I won't tell much more, at Bell Labs when I was 17 years old. And that exposed me to the world of technology. And I started to understand the power of the future. Prior to that, we lived in, me personally, a completely analog world. You and I are, digital immigrants. A lot of, hopefully the kids or people or young people on this Zoom are digital natives. And so they are experiencing and have experienced the world very different than what you and I dealt with. I crack up every now and then with some of my kids, and I show them
you too, huh?
A telephone, right? Remember the old telephones? They kind of look at that thing, right? Say, Dad, that looks like a save icon. I'm like, well, it's actually a 1.4 megabyte disk, right?
Exactly.
But what happened for me was the exposure to the world of technology through the lens of what was, again, the leader in technology, Bell Laboratories, helped me really understand the impact and power that technology would and could have. We worked on these Merlin PBXs, for instance, give you an example. And if you actually install one of these PBXs in a very large corporation, you could eliminate, 5,000 clerks, for instance, to actually, who were switching calls. Right? You start thinking about that. You start thinking about the economic benefit of that. Well, ultimately, I decided to go into chemical engineering, and at the time, we of course, focused on what we call unit operations, transformation of one form of matter to another, taking sand and making silicon wafers or taking oil and making plastic. But it was at a dawning of an age where we were starting to implement technology and computing power into the control systems of those unit operations. And the efficiency from that was just exponential. I remember one of the plants I was tasked to modernize and put in a programmable logic controller. When I was done with that work, increase the productivity by like 26%, which is a whole shift. If you think about it, increase the plant productivity by one whole shift, basically by putting tighter controls in. And then, it was at the time where they were starting to implement spreadsheets. And you remember there was VisiCalc and Multiplan and Lotus 123, and now we've all converged on Excel, and this all kind of leads to an interesting story. But ultimately, what that started to show me was the implications and impact that technology would have not only in the plant environment, but in the office environment. So, as I'm now at Goldman Sachs and I'm working on, my clients include a little company called Apple Computer at the time, a little company called Microsoft, a little company called eBay, a little company called Yahoo, Hewlett Packard, Texas Instruments. I'm sure you've heard of a couple of those names.
Yep.
And it was then a dawning when some of those companies were struggling to survive. Some were trying to understand business models. And I started to realize that in the world of enterprise or business software, that it was really at the beginning, call it the beginning of the first inning of that. People were now starting to buy computing power en masse. They were able to get financing for computing power. That was all new, believe it or not. I'm going to finance a new computer. It's like $1 million, and get an IBM, 370, and then you got to get, some refrigerated space. Some people put it in a closet or whatever, and then connect some terminals and some printers and all that sort of stuff. And well, what that led to for me was, frankly, the realization that the efficiency of this product that would ultimately be sold, which is software, and I'll get to that in a second, was going to far outstrip, in terms of the demand, the cost of implementing that software. So, ultimately, what you started to see, what you see today, is a commoditization of the hardware and all the values in the software. But no one was focused on doing buyouts in enterprise software. And as you met, and as I had a chance to meet, literally hundreds of software executives from some of the biggest companies, which I named, to some of the smallest, what I realized was that none of them actually did things the same. Now, being a process engineer, the most efficient thing you can do is kind of do the same thing over and over, repeatable processes, as opposed to each time you try to reinvent the wheel and refigure it out. And I said, well, if you brought a set of standardized conditions to the running of software companies, you probably get a pretty standardized output that probably you could control. And so that's, if you think about it, those are the insights and the dynamics that led to that. Now, the real challenge, of course, is the risk of leaving a great job like Goldman Sachs. And my grandfather thought I'd lost my mind. He was from Washington, D.C. And he's like, how could you ever leave Goldman Sachs? And I had long conversations with my grandfather about this. And finally, he kind of came around and said, yeah, this makes sense. But what he realized that I saw was the importance of being an independent businessman. Okay. And as an African-American, having an opportunity to do something that no other African-American heretofore had done. Right. And he said, and if you don't do that, how are you really going to feel about yourself? Right. And you got to take, and if you're going to take a risk, take that risk on yourself. Look, there's a whole lot of risks in this business. I deal with risk every single day. Some of them I get completely right. Some of them I get wrong. Right. But that is something you have to tune yourself to in understanding. That is the nature of what capitalism is how you think about risk. And I would just encourage, many of the executives on these calls to really stand back and think about risk and think about, the advantages of taking on more risk and setting up and, starting your own businesses. I was very encouraged to see an opening video about the restaurant in Memphis, Tennessee. And I remember, like I said, growing up in this beloved community, man, we went to all Black restaurants and Black grocery store and all those sort of things. And, the the dry cleaners. And frankly, once desegregation occurred, almost all those businesses went out of business. Right. And now here's a chance for us to kind of reinvent and rebuild that fabric in our community. Yeah.
Robert, there are a couple of questions on the chat that are timely as it relates to this topic. Tobiah, since he identified himself by name, as someone who has achieved such a high level of success in a space where there were so few people like you, did you ever have bouts of imposter syndrome during your climb? Did you ever have that?
You know, I got familiar with that term, imposter syndrome, later on in life. And, I hearkened back, frankly, to, one of my professors in chemical engineering back at Cornell. And, I was asking questions, and test is coming on and this and that. And in our chemical engineering program, you walked in for your exams and you had no calculator, and that was kind of it. You had to figure it out and do the math by hand, etc. And we were going through some things, and he kind of looked at me and said, "Robert, here's the thing. When you know what you know, then that's all you can do." And so, what was important to me throughout my academic experience and in my business experience was to, frankly, I could be an expert at my craft and work really, really hard at it, but also realize I may not know everything, and I may get some things wrong. And that's kind of is what it is. But, spend the time, spend the hours becoming an expert at your craft. You won't be an imposter because you know what you know. And if you know, and I've got plenty, even today, someone will ask me a question and say, I don't know. That's just not an area of my expertise. Yeah. I was talking with Mark Andreessen the other day, and we were talking about these, these NFTs, and he's like, I'm like, Mark, I don't really get this yet. I know a little bit about software, a little bit about technology. I'm not quite sure how this is playing out, right? Yeah. And he kind of chuckled. He said, me either. He said, but I'm paid to take a lot more risk than you. Yeah. He says, look, man, Mike, he's like, what's your loss ratio? I'm like, less 1%. He said, my loss ratio is 50%. He said, but I'm paid to take, in the venture world, paid to take that kind of risk. Right. And, double, triple, quadruple down on the winners, and just got to get over the losers. Right. So that's the nature of it. So, just do your work, be an expert at your craft, and know what you know. And if you don't know something, then don't pretend that you do.
Right. There was a saying in a session earlier at the conference today where someone says everybody wants to be a millionaire, but you need to do the work, as opposed to just having a dream. You need to do the work. And every time I've been with you, I appreciate the fact that even when you talk about the technology and your experiences, your excitement is exuded in your energy around it. I mean, you could just talk forever about the nuances of this, but you are a risk taker, which is what entrepreneurs are. And people need to associate that. The more risks you take, the more you learn. And when you think about strategy,
but it's also Mike, it is also calculating the risk. I mean, you've got to do the work and understand as much as you can. You're not going to know everything. Understand as much as you can. Yeah. And then assess that risk, right? And reward. Sometimes you get blindsided. Okay, here's what it is. But anyway, I'll let you ask your question. But it isn't blind risk taking. It's not standing on the edge of the cliff and saying, let me jump, just see how I do.
Thank you for that note, so people can know the difference, especially as they're listening in. But would you say you are better at good opportunities or better at avoiding bad ones?
That's a really interesting question. What I am really, really good at is assessing risk in a way that, and this is in my investing business, and saying, what are the critical factors for success that we have under our control? Okay. And then you say, if I can control these 5 things, and this is the outcome that I can predict, by controlling these 5 things. If these other 23 things happen, will it affect the outcome in a way that I shouldn't do this? So that's the way I think about it. There's critical factors for success being under our control. That's why the whole system is built the way that it is, so that we're not blindly guessing or just hoping we get it right or by gut instinct. It is, what can we control that we think will affect the outcome? Look, sometimes the things you can control, you're not able to control them to the extent you thought, right?
Yeah.
But there's certain things that you can control.
That is excellent advice. Excellent advice. Do you have any thoughts on the Dream Exchange Group? Are you familiar with them?
Not too familiar.
The first ever USA Black Stock Exchange in history, scheduled to come online soon. I didn't know if you heard of it, because someone Graylin is asking.
Yeah, heard of it, but not that familiar with it.
Yeah. Okay. So
what's the question?
The question was if you had thoughts on it, given that it's new. That's the extent of the question. But since he asked, I wanted to take advantage of the moment, since these are rare opportunities to get to ask you these questions where we have your full attention.
Yeah.
I
haven't put some more detail on it. I'll be happy to give some.
Okay.
So there's a couple, if people are ask me my thoughts on investing in African American, there are a bunch of brilliant African American entrepreneurs out there that really need to think about how to take advantage of access to public equity. Okay. And, to be frank with you right now, the SPAC market is a bit of a mess. That said, there are a bunch of, one of our challenges has been access to capital, for the history of time that, Africans and African Americans have been here. Right. And, there are some, every now and then there are some windows of that open up. This just happens to be one where there is access to capital that, folks on this call in particular, probably in a better position to take advantage of than most. And you should be very thoughtful and active in figuring out ways to access that capital.
Okay. And access to capital, that's a whole, we could go deep relative to the opportunity that represents. Quincy is asking if you could go deeper on your point about being risk averse versus being risk neutral as it relates to investing.
Yeah. So let's first start from a personal perspective in terms of, call it risk averse. I grew up in an era where the pinnacle of success for African Americans in business was, CEO of a Fortune 500 company. That was it. If once you're, there was nothing bigger, nothing greater, nothing grander. And then this guy, Reggie Lewis, showed up. Right. My hero. And he showed up with a different view on ownership. And, God rest his soul, he didn't get a chance to fully express his capabilities. But what he showed was with access to capital, that you could create, platforms owned by African Americans and African American entrepreneurs in that context, right? Now, don't get me wrong, there were many other African Americans who ran businesses, most of which were from the ground up, the Johnsons and the Ebonies and the right and ground up businesses where here's a guy, he said, I'm just going to go, in essence, get capital and buy and control this business. Right. Very different. Right. And all of a sudden you're like, well, wait a minute. Is it better to be a CEO of a Fortune 500 company where you can get fired any day, or to own your own business? Right. And so that's the conversation that started in the mid 80s. You remember in the early 90s. And so that was how do we do the capital formation and those sort of. So, a risk neutral perspective was, let me march as hard and as steady as I can in a public, or maybe private, company, and play the game by the rules that are well defined, using the proper set of manners, etc. Where I live, how I live, what I do, all that sort of stuff, and try to accelerate and reached the pinnacle of what we in our community felt was kind of the pinnacle of success in the corporate setting. Okay.
Yeah.
Or I could take another path, okay, which was one of, utilizing what is capital and figure out ways to utilize that capital to create platforms or businesses that we could then own and run or expand. And that's the paradigm, and that's going a little more risk forward leaning,
right?
In that context. Now that's the first part of that which is investing in yourself, and not everybody can do that.
Yeah.
And you say, man, I got married, I've got kids, I've got family, I've got parents. I need to keep this job as opposed to me going taking a flyer on something else. I get that. Trust me, I've been there. I understand. But then there's other folks that say, I've got all that and I still am going to go take that risk. And sometimes it pays off and sometimes it doesn't. But that's the nature of how you have to assess risk and how you feel about yourself and your capabilities.
Right. Robert, was there any big losses you learned from the most that you're willing to talk about?
Well, you lose every day and you win every day, right? It's just, that's every now and then you have a problem with a company and an executive or what. Okay, and then you hired the wrong person or you made the wrong judgment. You learn every day. I think the thing that I would say is, the biggest lessons learned are address the deficiencies in the best way that you can, in the best way that you know how, try to minimize the impact and then move forward.
Yeah.
And that's really how I think about it. And that's all you can do. I get up every morning and I say my prayers and my meditation, and then I look for guidance, wisdom, and inspiration. And, most days it comes in the right form, and every now and then you get something wrong, but you can't dwell on it. Exactly. If you dwell on that, you never move forward.
Yeah. The activities and projects you're working on now seem such a long ways from your early career work in engineering, but you've committed yourself to the Giving Pledge, which for those of who are out there means you plan on investing half of your net worth during your lifetime. What are some areas you've chosen to focus on as part of your philanthropic giving? Yeah,
they're actually not that far removed, believe it or not. Because what I look for is systemic solutions at scale. Just like if you bring a software platform into a company, what you're doing is trying to solve a big problem all at once that it's solved forever.
Yeah.
As opposed to kind of treating every little symptom where it pops up, So I look at, for instance, Student Freedom Initiative. What we're saying is, look, one of the biggest challenges for African Americans is 60+% of our wealth goes to servicing student debt.
Yeah.
Okay. Which I think is just, it's atrocious.
Yeah.
So what the Student Freedom Initiative says is, look, let's create a pool of capital. We'll lever that pool of capital. We will lend it, and I always focus on STEM students, to our STEM students at the HBCUs who are in junior, senior year. So basically they've done their freshman and sophomore year, so they believe in themselves, right? Junior, senior year, they borrow the money, they pay it back less than the Parent Plus loans, and they don't pay it back to the government, they pay it back to this fund, which gets recycled. That's a systemic solution, okay? I'm focusing on this thing called the Six Cities Initiative, right? It's Memphis, Tennessee. It's Birmingham, Alabama. It is Houston. It's Atlanta. It's New Orleans, and it is Charlotte, North Carolina. And I'm saying, listen, what we need to do is bring infrastructure, and we're going to make some big announcements here in the next few days. Where we're bringing capacity to all the HBCUs to get them to 4G, ultimately to 5G capacity, which also extends to their neighborhoods, which gives the ability for the businesses in their neighborhoods to now start accessing what is the on-ramp to opportunity, which is broadband access. Okay. And then from there, you can start to layer on top of that. Okay. How do we manage things like, the food deserts, and how do we manage the healthcare deserts, telemedicine? How do we manage the business deserts? Well, we need capital, right? So, and bringing in capital partners to the CDFIs and MDIs to bring in a modernization of that infrastructure. First of all, one of the things we do, okay, and then bringing tier one capital into that infrastructure, so then I can lend money to the small to medium African-American businesses in those communities. So it's the same thing as far as I'm concerned. That's through the lens that I look through, right? It's bringing an engineered solution to what is a systemic problem, and then hopefully it creates a systemic solution. So we're not dealing with this a generation from now.
Yeah, but I like the fact that the impact of it is scale as opposed to incremental. I mean, that's real.
If you hit these 6 cities and we get them right, these 6 cities touch 13% of the African-American population. If you do a 100-mile radius around those 6 cities, guess what? It's 50% of the African-American population. So these are businesses, it's school children, it's learning management systems for school kids. It's, it's modernizing the banking infrastructure. It's modernizing, the business infrastructures, which, being you implement software solution for a small and medium business, you'll get a 900% ROI on that solution. So every small business, from a restaurant to a barbershop to a real estate agent that's owned by African-Americans, should be utilizing software to be more efficient in what they do. And so let's bring that technology and that infrastructure to that community.
And on that note, Robert, because I know I really wanted you to share with all of us what your 2% solution is. It feels like this is an appropriate topic given what you're talking about in terms of scale, because it's pretty awesome. Just talk about the 2% solution and what you're calling on companies to do. Yeah,
at its highest level, the average American donates, believe it or not, or gives away about 2% of their income a year, right? African Americans, believe it or not, give away more. But what I'm calling on.
You mean like tithing as a business?
Yeah, tithing. 2%. I mean, if you look at the average, and there's a study done, it says, how much do Americans give to their local church, to their baseball teams, all that sort of stuff, the Little League, all that. It's about 2%. So I'm calling on the largest corporations, basically America, and say, take the same thing. We've got these wealth disparities, racial disparities, systemic racism. So why don't you tithe or put 2% of your income into solving these problems? Now, we'll make this announcement in a couple of days with a very large technology vendor. Look, it's not 2%, but it's a big number, which is great. I want to get them to 2%. And by what they are doing, we're basically going to be able to bring between 9 and 14 HBCUs basically into 4G/5G capacity, right? That enables a whole network of opportunity for those communities. So what I'm calling on these corporations is to think about, how do you donate 2% for the next 10 years with things that you know how to do to eliminate the disparity in America of services or wealth or income into African-American communities. So that's how I think about it. And so, we're starting to get a lot of folks thinking about it. We'll make this announcement, Netflix saying, let me donate $500 million, or PayPal, let me donate $500 million. Great. Now let's get to 2%. Right? Target saying, I'm going to do $2 billion worth of spend. Great. But now let's get to 2%. Right? And if you drive them there over 10 years, I mean, it first of all, if you eliminate the wealth disparity, you've increased the U.S. GDP by $1.5 trillion annually. Right? Just by doing that. And I think those are the ways we can eliminate, the systemic issues that have caused and perpetuated the wealth and income disparities that we're all experiencing.
Well, the key message to me is, for Black men in leadership, it's not just about our own personal achievements, but the ability to make a difference for the community at large, in addition to what we gain for ourselves individually. So, I get inspired when I listen to how you're applying your gifts and talents to making things better through the process of technology to scale, investing. You make it, at least you explain it in a way that's very simple and easy to understand.
I think about it, it is about, again, I grew up, as we started this conversation, in a beloved community, right? Yeah. And now it's our job to create more beloved communities.
Well, the bottom line question, and I want you to take your time on this one, is, what do you, Robert Smith, want your leadership legacy to be? What do you want your leadership legacy to be? I know you've
You know,
thought about it.
yeah, it's funny. It's funny. I don't actually think about legacy, believe it or not, all that much.
Really? Mm-hmm.
No, I don't. It's kind of,
Mm-hmm.
it's been an interesting term, kind of bantied around a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I actually think about very simply, do what you can when you can, and, and do it according to God's will. And that's how I think about it. And
Mm-hmm.
if you wake up every day with that in your mind, hopefully you get some stuff done that actually helps, right?
Yeah.
And you may not get it all right, but do what you can when you can.
Yeah. As simplistic as you make that sound, I mean, the fact that you understand life has both successes and challenges, and you're going to lose sometimes, but it's about what you do, getting up and making an effort versus just being defeated by it. Hopefully, is a message that will resonate with everybody that's listening in today, because that's the embodiment of your brand to me.
Yeah.
There are a couple of chat questions that I wanted to. We have a few minutes left.
Right.
When you think of everything going on in the world today, is there anything, is there a one thing that keeps you up at night at all?
Well, there's a bunch of things, man. We hit a little. I mean, that's what we've been talking about. Systemic racism keeps me up at night, and it permeates a lot of the American society and institutions. And part of what we have to do is to eliminate it. The good news is we have a lot more allies than my parents' generation and their parents' generation and their parents' generation. And so we just have to keep those allies mobilized with us. I've got children, we've got family members who are younger than us who will have to, live in this country. And, I think it is upon us to make it a more just society in which they live, so they feel valued and loved and have the ability to express their greatest human self in their lifetimes.
Thank you for that. And the one question from Jamal, he said, similar to stocks in the industry, how do you restrict yourself from falling into societal pressures of what to invest your time and value in? I think that's just for guidance for us all.
Yeah,
you're perfect, and the rest of us are just trying to be you. I mean,
no, man, and I like all things. I focus on things that are of interest to me that I think can have the impact that I would like. I focus on, my company Invista and what we do and how we do it, and how we expand our investing capacity and how we can do it globally. And I mean, I focus a lot of my time, energy, attention on that. I then have time, energy, and attention on being an African-American male and a Black father, right? And those are and how do I deal with all of that, and what can I do about that? And then I think about it in the context of being, a mentor with a number of African-American investors of different sizes, stages, and how can I be helpful? Some of them are investing things I have no idea about. And how can I be helpful to them? In some cases, I can't be helpful to you, right? In some cases, I can be. And then I think about, what my family focuses on in some of our philanthropic work around everything from aging out foster kids to music education and providing outdoor experiences, or alleviating what I call some of the burdens of that society has placed on African-American youth. To give them a chance to, kind of more fully express the opportunity that this country presents.
Yeah.
And so when you kind of get through all that and a little bit of pleasure reading, I don't know how much more time I have. So, it's easy not to look at other stuff.
Yeah. But I was thinking about the Sphinx organization you support too. So just the contributions are endless. The last question is, when you were that little child in Colorado, did you ever imagine that what you're doing now is what did you ever think of that when you were running around, being called out by neighbors about things you did around the block?
At that age, no. But when I got to high school, and I don't think I've ever told this story. And I got the job at Bell Labs.
Listen up.
Yeah, and I had to drive every day. I had to get up around 4:30, 5 o'clock. I had a 69 Plymouth Satellite with probably about 100,000 miles on it. And I had to drive to work. And I go to work 6 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week, because I was just so excited to be there. I would drive by, I remember it was a big oil refinery. It was owned by the Vickers Company at the time. And I'd see this city, okay? Oil refineries kind of look like cities because they're light. At night, there was a bunch of lights on the, on the various towers and separation towers and all that sort of thing. And I was like, spectacular. And I said, I wonder, how do you own one of those things? How do you own a business where you actually own a city like that? And at some point I said, one day, one day I'm going to have the capacity to do that. And so, I was a teenager at the time. Originally, but you drive by it every day, twice a day, right? And when you start to see it and then you start to understand it, and I'll tell you a funny story, 25 years later, the family that owned that, I ended up buying one of their software businesses, believe it or not. And and that story kind of came back to me and thought about it. But a lot of it you actually have to see things. And that's why it's important for our kids to see things and to experience things. That's why these internships are so important, and give them an opportunity and a chance to dream and expand. Now, some of the dreams may not be, so well directed at certain ages. But if they never see it, they never dream. If they never dream, it's hard for them to become. I was watching the video earlier, and they had, I remember when Jesse Jackson came to town when I was in, high school, and kind of walked through that I am somebody. And I mean, that stuff made a difference, because if you grew up in the neighborhood I grew up in, beloved, but there was a very defined things that people did, Pullman Porter, teacher, and maybe at a dinner, but you need to have some expression of who you can be in front of you in a way that helps you to visualize yourself and manifest your life in that form or another. And that's why all that's important. That's why ELC is important. It's important for young executives to now look at senior executives and say, man, I can get to that level. I can do those things. And that whole mentoring dynamics is critically important. But if you don't see it, it's hard to be it.
It's hard to be there. Yeah. And we so appreciate our friendship between our respective organizations and support to Robert. So I'm told I have 2 more minutes. And so there's one question that's related that I think is a little bit opportunistic, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because you're here. Is how do new business owners start the conversation with initiatives that you mentioned so that they can get the pipeline to receive funding to start their business ideas?
It depends on what you're doing, right? I mean, but you've got to go do the work. I mean, it's different if you say, hey, I want to own a chain of barbershops, or say, hey, I want to start a software company, right? But you've got to go do the work and understand the landscape of what the opportunities are out there, and be prepared to talk to thousands of people to figure out where the seam is that works for what it is that you want to do. And then when you show up, make sure what it is that you want to do makes economic sense, right? You get the, hey, I've got this great idea, and someone pitches it to you. Say, yeah, that looks like a lovely thing for you to do, but it doesn't make your investors any money, right? So. So you got to be, you got to educate yourself and kind of, and embrace that, that as a fundamental step is educating what would cause someone to invest in your business. And for most investors, it's returns to them. Make no mistake about it. Investors aren't interested in just putting you in business so you have a different life or lifestyle. They're not interested in that. Most are interested in, how am I going to get a reasonable rate of return for the capital and the risk that I'm taking and putting it into you? And like I said, don't get offended, but that's what investors do, right?
Plain.
Yeah.
Well, Robert, it's been absolutely great, and it's good to see you.
You too,
I
Mike.
look forward to seeing you in person one of these days soon. But thank you for spending time with us at the conference. Your perspectives and the experiences and things, and inspiring us to be more legacy related as relates to making a difference in our respective communities with the monies and resources that we have, is what landed very, very well. So
It's a pleasure. And listen,
again.
for all of the folks around, encourage every one of your corporations to participate in some form of 2% solution. Get them to figure out ways to contribute capital or, know-how that aids our community, so that we have the ability to participate more fully in the economy. I mean, it's you folks are in the companies, and if you make the call and, and make the demands of your management teams, they'll listen. It's a lot easier from the inside than it is from the out.
Well said. Thank you. It's
All right.
good to see you.
Thanks, Mike. All right. All the best to you. Yep.
All right.
Enjoy.
Bye.
Bye-bye.